Welcome to another edition of Journey of Hope. Stories of people that have been impacted by the ministry of Loma Linda University Medical Center. Each year we have 750,000 outpatient visits and over 30,000 inpatient visits. One of the undergirding philosophies of Loma Linda University Medical Center is to make man whole, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. There are many people that contribute to that goal. Each of the people there are involved in a ministry of caring, of compassion that will help our people experience hope and healing and wholeness. One of the key components of the medical center is the chaplain services. Our special guest today is James Greek, director of the chaplaincy program there at Loma Linda. Jim, it's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Our time with being acquainted with each other goes back 20, 25 years, I guess.
Yep, at least.
But so our audience can know. Tell us where you began, your life and your ministry and your schooling.
Well, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. I lived on about 6 acres of land, so I grew close to nature quite a bit. And this is really going to date me, but I was around when Sputnik went up.
Okay.
And I remember coming home from school and hearing this beep, beep, beep over the little TV there. And I became just enamored with science and astronomy, and later actually majored in it in a university in South Florida. But I realized right away I was too far away from people, 2 o'clock in the morning with a telescope, and I just wanted to get back. So I majored in psychology, but I had that love for science. And soon after that, I went back to Jacksonville, and an evangelist was holding this big evangelistic series in town. And he came and he started telling me about the Bible. And
so you weren't a Seventh-day Adventist?
Oh, no, wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist yet.
Okay.
And he knew my astronomy background, and he put it like this. He said, you stick with me and the Lord, and I'll show you some real space travel.
Right.
And it caught my attention. Anyhow, I joined the church and went into ministry after a lot of weighing,
So you had been in college, and then
yeah.
Okay, so then you felt a call to the ministry.
Yeah, and then went back to Southern Missionary College for the first time.
Okay.
And just really loved it and received my training there, and then ended up going to Gulf States Conference. It used to be Alabama-Mississippi Conference, and pastored there a number of years. And became ordained, then accepted a call to Albuquerque, New Mexico, way out west, and pastored there.
That's the Texaco Conference?
Texaco Conference,
okay.
Yeah, land of coyotes and good people and roadrunners and chilerianos.
Oh, chilerianos,
oh, yes,
okay.
Yes. So then I received a call back to Gulf States Conference and worked in administration, and later became president there, and just truly loved it. But there was this gnawing in my heart, too, that I just miss being with people. I just miss that part.
And you're talking about now being in administration,
yeah,
further removed.
Yeah, budgets are nice,
Yes,
but
I
miss
know.
people.
We were both conference presidents at the same time.
I know. So anyhow, bottom line is I accepted a call to come to Loma Linda to be a chaplain. And I thought just a kind of a simple life and work with people, and just I really loved it, and that didn't last long. And Jerry Davis, my boss, retired, and I was asked to assume his position. And so I've been doing that for the past, I've been director for the past 6 years, but I've been there for 13 years total. And
now, did you have any kind of a struggle when you were president and then leaving everything in the past? You've been a minister, and then been a ministerial secretary, and then you've been the president, and then you're kind of leaving the church. Because I know I had to go through the very same thing when I came here. Was there any kind of a struggle in going into the chaplaincy?
Whoa, I remember crossing that desert in a rented U-Haul at 110 degrees with no air conditioner, thinking, God, are you punishing me for what I'm doing here? But he wasn't. And I just kept saying that this is part of ministry. It's just a different type of ministry.
You're absolutely right.
And I felt that when I got here and started, going bed to bed with these patients and entering into their journey, I felt like this is where I need to be.
Well, when I realized that there's 30,000 people that go through that medical institution every year of all different kinds of backgrounds, and many of them in a crisis situation, what a wonderful opportunity for ministry. Oh, yeah. So you went through your training, and then you came here, and tell us a little bit about the training for becoming a chaplain.
Well, I thought, after, going through Southern Missionary College and Andrews and all that I was ready to be a chaplain. And I had this perception that I pictured the chaplain going into the room and kind of patting someone on the back and having a little prayer and out the door.
Giving a little promise.
Oh, yes, and realized that in reality it was nothing like that. It's much deeper. I mean, the whole dynamic of entering into another person's journey in some of the most traumatic times of life calls for a lot of prayer and a lot of God's Spirit and training too.
So there's a lot of training in addition to just being a minister that the chaplains go through to really understand the dynamic of what a sick person is going through. So tell us a little bit about that.
I thought I was driving that U-Haul van straight to Loma Linda, but the idea was to go to Yuma Regional Medical Center in Yuma, Arizona. Which
as a stopping place.
Yeah, and I spent 1 year there.
In
training, and it's training in CPE, which is Clinical Pastoral Education. And the bottom line is, and I was surprised, a lot of people don't quite make it through the program. It's one thing to be in ministry, I'm finding, but to be in ministry when you're there in the depths of people's despair day and day after day after day, they'd have to train you in a special way.
Not everybody can do that.
No, and it doesn't mean they're not good or anything, but it's just that they may not be cut out for that kind of work.
But their gifts are laying in a different area.
Yeah, and I can remember times too, Lynn, where I would deal with some really tough cases, and instead of going home at 3 in the morning after a call, I would just get in my car and drive, and
to try to process or escape or what?
Well, process, but feel the pain. I mean,
you're identifying with the people.
Oh my, you have a family, a wonderful family, husband, wife, kids in the back seat, and then a drunk hits them, and one little girl is dead, the other one's paralyzed, and the wife's hanging on, and the husband's there, and you're there with him and trying to work him through that, and realize that as I drive away, I realize, all the little challenges I have in my life are about this big compared to what people are carrying.
So a simple prayer doesn't do it?
No, it takes, from a chaplain standpoint, what I'm finding, it takes a little bit of tenacity to get in there and realize that there's going to be immense pain and you're going to feel it too and be with them. And I think probably the hardest call I ever had was in Yuma when I was being trained, and I was on call. They were just training me to be on call. My son says, Dad, let's go play ball in the backyard. And I was there in my shirt and tie. And I said, no, I'm on call. This pager may go off. And he said, oh, come on, let's play. And so I finally did, and the pager did go off. Now, he was about 8 years old then. I went to the emergency room, and the nurse was in the corner over there, and this man was just wailing. And he had a little boy in his arms, and he was doing this back and forth. And he was saying to the little boy, let's play ball, let's play ball. And I asked the nurse what happened, and she said that this little boy came to his father at the same time my son came to me and said, let's play ball. And he said, no, go away, I'm too busy, I've got other things to do.
The father did?
Yeah, and so the little boy went in the backyard, played in the creek, and fell in. And after a while, the father realized his son was missing. He went back there, and his son was drowned. Oh. And so he's in the emergency room saying, let's play ball. And I remember going into that situation, and kind of, you couldn't say anything. There was nothing to say. You just had to kind of hold on to the man. And I'm looking down at the face of this little boy who's now dead and thinking, there but for the grace of God, go me. And those kind of cases, it kind of gets you in touch with what life is all about. And this idea of trying to be strong for others, you really walk the line sometimes. Yeah.
Well, the program there at Yuma was for chaplains in general. When I say in general, it wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist program.
No,
It was a chaplaincy program, training people to be a chaplain in a medical center type of setting. So what is different about Loma Linda? I mean, we do talk about to make man whole.
Yeah.
Is there a difference at Loma Linda in the chaplains program and in the training? I mean, you're training not only chaplains, but you're working with doctors and other personnel there at the medical center. What is the difference at Loma Linda?
Well, as you can imagine, in many other places, they have chaplains, but there's a lot of diversity out there among chaplains. And sometimes...
now we say diversity.
Well, spiritual, religious diversity.
Okay,
I mean, where we're operating from is basically the Christian orientation.
Sure.
Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, but in some places, you get to feel it's a little more psychology and counseling versus specifically spiritual. So in our hospital here, we pretty much acknowledge that we're here because of Jesus' calling. And when we go to people, we're here to bring them hope and a definite spiritual emphasis. Naturally, we're respectful of other people's beliefs. But when they come into our hospital, they see the pictures of Christ, they see the cross on the outside, and it was funny. One time I was called to the emergency room. Well, it's not funny being in the emergency room, but this lady was sitting out. It was crowded. She was in the middle there in her bed there, and this young resident came by, and she was working with another patient, but she looked down to the face of this lady and said, "You're afraid, aren't you?" And she said, "I'm terrified." And so she said, "Let me have a prayer for you." And this was the attending, and just prayed for the patient. And I talked to the patient the next day because she came to us and said, if I felt like every cell in my body relaxed when that young doctor prayed for us. Well, her pastor came in, right after that, and he was saying, "How are you? What happened?" And she said, "Oh, forget all about that. Do you know the doctors pray for their patients here at Loma Linda?" And that was her whole thrust. And so the next day, he was in his pulpit in Los Angeles, and it went out everywhere. "Do you know the doctors at Loma Linda pray for their patients?"
Wow.
And to me, that's the difference. And it's not just chaplains. I mean, we work with spiritual things, but I was just so not surprised, but inspired by the amount of, the doctors, the nurses, the social work, housekeeping. Have that spiritual emphasis, you know.
Well, I know I attended morning rounds one time as speaking on behalf of patients, and was interviewed by a prominent physician from another area that was dealing on the morning rounds, and he interviewed me, and then he had to acknowledge that this matter of dealing with people on a spiritual basis, he had no background, he didn't know how to do with it and deal with it. And so in the chaplains program, now you're also a professor and you're working with doctors and other people there. What kind of a curriculum do you have? I mean, how do we help people here for whole person care?
Well, I know I and some others teach classes for the School of Medicine, School of Religion, like integrative care. How do you bring spirituality to the patient and all those ramifications, and classes like death and dying, how do you deal with those situations? And those are pretty much required classes. But
required for
the medical students.
For the medical students.
And but there's an elective that was started a while back, integrative care for the fourth-year medical students. And Will Alexander was, I think, instrumental in School of Medicine starting that up. And it's for those who want to go the extra mile. They don't have to take that course. And I've been teaching that
so
class.
It's an elective.
It's an elective.
Okay.
But over the past years, we've averaged 120 to 140 students a year that on their own have come. And it's an intensive.
So it's an additional training.
It's additional training.
Okay.
And it started out being a 2-week thing, you know. And they would go out with different individuals and analyze how the caregivers did whole person care. What did they do when they got into the patient's world?
So were they in a mentoring relationship?
Yeah. And I would line that up with a number of individuals. I was the main instructor, and I would share a lot of things with them about whole person care. They'd have to make visits on their own. And I'd have them come back to my office. We'd sit in a circle, and I'd say, "What happened? From the time you went into that room to the time you came out, how did you get into that patient's world, the obstacles?" And I have them do a research paper, too, for example. Basically, whatever area of medicine you're going into, choose a topic in whole person care in that one area.
For example?
For example, AIDS. If you're working with AIDS patients, write a paper, a research paper, based with 3 parts. The first part is, give me the background, history, etiology. You know, if you're dealing with AIDS, it would be, for example, how the virus works, what's this mutation business that's happening now, and the thing is changing, and what's the latest drug therapies, that kind of thing. The second section deals with what are core whole person care issues a patient like this might be dealing with. Now, there's a whole list of issues, but there's often those core issues. For example, with AIDS, even though they may live a long time, many times they're plunged right into end-of-life issues because they know their life is cut short. Their social support begins to shift because of that disease, unfortunately.
So some of the people that have been surrounding them are backing away?
Yeah. And as they go to groups, for example, they pick up new friends, and there's that transition. Even it's divided family. So those are all core issues. And then the third piece of this is, given the first 2 sections, how would you work with a patient like this? What would your protocol be? What are things you would do and not do? For example, even the spiritual. In our society, we've sent the signal sometimes that HIV or AIDS is a curse from God for whatever reason. So here comes a chaplain or a spiritual doctor, and they go, "Wait a minute, I thought God is the one that did this to me. Why are you coming to me with God?" And so we have to help them work through that and understand grace and forgiveness. And so this paper basically is, I want them to walk away with a solid tool, whatever area they're in. And we have peds students, you know, they're working with children. And for example, when a little one dies, the parents are often dealing with this guilt. What could I have done more? And just in different areas, it brings its own challenge. But these medical students, and I have a stack of research papers, I want them to kind of become an expert in how to deal with their own patients.
So now how far along are they in their education at this point?
They're graduating. They're 4th year.
They're 4th-year medical students.
And then they're going to go into residency after that.
And these are people that they've come back, they realize they need more, and so they're getting this intense training. Now, it started off as 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, the interest kept growing and growing, and getting so many students that now I'm doing 4 weeks.
Okay, and how many days are we talking about?
Well, it's okay. The first 2 weeks deals with the basics. Then the second 2 weeks deals with more in-depth research.
Are we talking about almost every day?
Oh yeah, every day.
Oh, every day. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a very intense course.
It's not full days, but
Yeah.
they have because they have research and reading.
So I mean, it's a full day for them, but
Yeah.
they're not in class the whole time.
Yeah.
They're doing the research and working with
Yeah.
the patients and one thing.
And you know, it was amazing to me. And I think sometimes it takes some of these students by surprise. As they practice getting into people's worlds, it triggers their own needs down deep inside. I know one time the subject that I was talking to them about was how do you minister to a professional or a pastor or somebody who's used to being strong for everybody else? And they're very hesitant to say, I'm afraid or I'm scared. And I noticed as we were talking, this one female student was sniffling in the corner, and all the other students were looking over at her. And come to find out, she went home the week before up north, and her father was diagnosed with cancer, and he was a pastor, if I remember right. And he wouldn't say anything about it. He wouldn't show anything about it. And so we talked about how to work with people like this. And she went home and practiced it on her dad. And he opened up, and the two of them cried together. And so it's
probably not an unusual case either in somebody in that kind of a position.
No, but these students, I keep saying amazed, but I'm not so much amazed. I'm just inspired by the depth of spirituality of these students.
So when they leave here, are you having any further contact with them?
Yeah, I get calls periodically, and I try to find that letter. But one letter, it was sent by the father of the medical student, and she was doing her residency in Jacksonville, Florida, where I grew up. And he sent me this letter back and basically said, I just want you to know that where she is and where she's doing her residency and all that, that other physicians will get these cases, where the patients have spiritual needs and emotional needs, and rather than deal with them themselves, they send them over to my daughter, who's been trained in this.
So he recognized that she had been trained.
Yeah, and he said, I just want to let you know that it's working. And one of our staff here at School of Medicine has a son in the Mayo Clinic, I think is where he was mentioning, and his son's doing the same thing, and down in Miami the same. And one of the students this was about a year ago, called up and said, I'm finding the physicians in our area who are spiritually minded, and we've already we're up to 3, and we meet a half hour before
work. So he's in his residency now?
This is a woman. Now he's probably
finished.
She's finished now, but she says I'm training them, and it's just kind of.
So the word is going out there then.
Yeah. So Will Alexander's vision and School of Medicine, it's kind of slowly.
So this matter of whole person care is more than just a title.
Oh.
It is really, it's beginning to permeate.
Yeah.
And there's really instruction going. Are you working with anybody besides the doctors?
Well, I teach classes to nurses, and I'm not the only one involved in our chaplains department. I'm familiar with other chaplains departments, but what's unique here is that there's a steady stream of students of all types coming in and out of the hospital. I was part of this this past summer. There's a 5-hour course I was teaching to physical therapists, and most of them were from India and not even Christian. And they were wondering
that should have been a challenge.
Oh, I thought, I just held my breath, And usually I tell the students to buckle up, but this time I told myself to buckle up, and I didn't know what to expect. But we went through the course, and after it was over, there were about 40 of them in the class, and they came and said, we're all going back to our country now, and there are no chaplains, there are no priests, there's no anybody, it's just going to be us. And they said, we're all of a sudden realizing this business of spiritual care and whole person care, it's not just a luxury. If we don't do this, we failed. So can we keep in touch with you through the internet and continue, mentoring along the way? And that was just exciting.
So these were non-Christians,
yes,
going back to their country in India,
yeah,
and really wanted to stay in contact so that they could continue to develop their skills in working with people.
And it's really revealing. Years ago, not that many years ago, I think society, medical work is kind of compartmentalized, not here, but in other places, where you have the medical work, you have social, you have spiritual, and everybody has their own job to do. But what they're finding out...
Little silos.
Yeah, what they're finding out, there's threads that go through all of it. And we're all involved in whole person care. The doctors, nurses, housekeeping, and we all have something, we're pieces of the puzzle. And it's just exciting. And the research coming out is unbelievable. We had Dr. Felden here a few years back, and others are doing it too. And they're basically saying if you put an individual in a setting or an atmosphere where they can give and receive love, and I remember he wrote his formula all the way across the board.
Well, he's writing it down.
Yeah, he's proving it. And he said if you do that, you will affect somebody on a molecular level, or a cellular level, I should say. Our immune system, and he even reached the point that people who have pets, there's a reason that they do better, because they can give love and receive love.
That's why they have pet therapy then.
Yeah, so this idea of chaplaincy be just a quick prayer down at the door, it's not that way at all. And I look at, too, that it's a little window of opportunity, that times where we all cross paths here in this hospital and others where we can affect people for the rest of their lives.
What kind of a challenge have you had in dealing with some of the patients? Anything that really jumps out?
Well, I was part of a presentation a few weeks back, difficult issues in whole person care.
Yeah.
And there were things that you wouldn't think necessarily, but I thought back in my experience of our chaplains, for example, ministry to the unconscious. You know,
Ministry to the unconscious.
You think, well, they can't hear you, they can't, why do anything? But what's been found is this, that a lot of times people are unconscious.
So you're talking about a patient that may be comatose or appears to be comatose and not responding.
Yeah, and you've heard stories where they've heard what you've said and all the rest. Now, I realize it's not true in every sense.
So this is a challenge, ministry to the unconscious.
Yeah, but what's being found too is our minds are remarkable. For example, I think you and I talked the other day about this. My son wanted to have a party at my house, and I said, sure, just don't mess the place up, da-da-da. I locked myself in the back room. Had about 15 teenagers, but I could lay in bed and pick out his voice out of the crowd. And they're finding, too, even people who appear totally unconscious, when loved ones talk to them, they recognize, maybe because of meds or whatever, they can't pick out the words exactly, but they recognize the tones of the voice. They recognize that the one I love is right there with me. And what's found, too, and this is common sense, I guess, that people recognize compassion in a voice.
They can tell.
They can tell. And so even with these medical students, I said, when you're dealing with somebody that's unconscious, you know, lean over to them, introduce yourself and say, you may not be able to hear me, but, you know, and here's what's happening. Your wife came to see you today, your daughter. So
talk to the patient as a person.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There was a case in Yuma that it just gives me cold bumps to this day. And I was young over there. This man was in a coma, and was a VIP in the city, and his fiancée was there, and they asked me to go down. So I ministered to her for a long time, several days. And
in the presence of
the patient laying there, we'd pray for the patient and all that, you know. Well,
then carrying on the conversation.
Yeah, we'd have prayer for him, and we did all the right things.
Sure.
But then after the guy came out of the coma, the nurse called me and said, he's awake, and this is 2 weeks later.
And everybody's thrilled.
Excited, except they couldn't figure out why he was asking for the x-ray tech.
He was asking for the x-ray tech.
And so I went to visit him, and he said, I recognize your voice. And I thought, wow, it's something. You recognize my voice. And
he'd been unconscious for how long?
It's about 2.5 weeks, I think, total. And then he said, and then I said to him, why are you asking for the x-ray tech? And then he wasn't sure. I could tell he was a little uncomfortable. He says, Chaplain, you did a good job, and I really appreciate you coming.
So he recognized that you were there and been ministering to him or to her?
To her, yeah. But here's the clincher on this. I said, I wanted to talk to the x-ray tech because he came to take x-rays every other day. And this guy was kind of big, and he said, the x-ray tech would come over and pat him on the belly and then lean over and say, I know you're in there somewhere. He said, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think you can. I'm going to talk. And he started telling him how the Dodgers lost the last game and what's happening with politics and how hot it is and the color dress his fiancée was wearing for the day. And then he said, the x-ray tech saying to this patient, I've heard you're a spiritual man, so I want to have a short prayer for you. And when you finally wake up, let's go out and get something to eat together, you know.
So he carried on all this conversation, talking directly to him.
And so when the guy finally came back to life, he said, you know, Chaplain, you prayed for me, almost in third person, and I appreciate you and my fiancée doing this. But this x-ray tech, he talked to me like I was still in the game. And he said, and he used the illustration that just, again, cold chills up and down my spine, about this little girl who fell into a pipe a long time ago, about 50 feet underground, and they were trying to get her out. They didn't want to bring in big equipment because it would crush all kinds of problems. And in one scenario, they were all there, and I think there's a policeman or a fireman leaning over the pipe, and he told him, be quiet, be quiet. And finally somebody said, what? And he said, she's singing to herself. You know, 50
way
feet,
down 50
way down,
feet
50
down,
feet in that dark.
Hear her singing.
Would you be singing under there?
How old was she?
She was, I think, about 5 or 6.
No
just
kidding.
real little tiny little girl. And so after it was all over, they finally did get her out. And
weren't they afraid of things caving in?
Yeah, well, they dug way back and brought me in. It was and I think they even tried to tie a small waisted guy and dropped it. It was unbelievable. But when they finally got her out, they said, you know, we heard you singing in there to yourself, and weren't you afraid? And her response was just unbelievable. Her response was, my mommy knew where I was, and then I could sing.
My mommy knew
where I was.
Because I knew, my mommy knows I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so she was able to sing.
And that patient told me, he said, when that x-ray tech kept talking to me, like he knew where I was. And so I felt okay. And so, you know, this was just one specific, there's a lot of things, but this business of chaplaincy and spiritual care, we have to get gutsy sometimes and step out of the box and try to find people where they are in these hard times. And yeah.
Do you have any patients that after they've left, they've gotten back in touch with you?
Oh, my. Yeah, we have, for example, gang members You know, they've been shot up and they're brought to the hospital, and here I am, white Anglo male, and it takes me a long time sometimes when I was working on those units to get into their worlds because they distrust. But when you finally do get in there and you kind of create a safe atmosphere between you and them, which sometimes takes days, they finally open up and they say, you know, Chaplain, I really don't want to go back on the street. They're going to kill me out there. And I talk to them, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to go into architecture, but I don't know how to do this. And they don't know the system. And so you start telling them about how they can get loans and grants. And these folks don't have mentors. They don't know. And they write you back 6 months later, I'm in school, or I've just gotten married. Or,
it's got to be
yeah. And so the ministry's like a ripple effect going out. Or I'll meet somebody at Walmart. And I'm speaking of myself, but everybody over there has these same stories. You know, and somebody comes up and tugs on your shirt at Walmart at Christmas time, and they say, Chaplain, I haven't seen you in, what, 8 years? Yeah. Do you remember that prayer you made for me? And I'm sitting here thinking, 10,000 patients later, which prayer? And they remember to a T, because you met them in crisis, and it kind of stays in their brain. And so,
well, Chaplain, James, Pastor, Elder, you know, you've given us a glimpse of what is different about Loma Linda when we talk about whole person care. It's more than just a term. It's really a unique ministry that you're providing to the patients that come in there. Not only the patients, but apparently in the curriculum that you're teaching to interact with the doctors and the nurses and the other people that are there. For our listening audience, you know, I'm so glad you've been able to join us, because we've been talking about during the last several months about Loma Linda and its unique ministry, and you've heard many of the patients here and the impact that the healing ministry has made upon them. But the chaplain here has given us an insight into what really is different at Loma Linda in this whole person care. To make man whole is the undergirding philosophy, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. For those of you out in the audience, God's got a plan for your life. You may be confronted with some kind of a crisis, but just right now, if you'll turn to Him and give Him an opportunity, ask Him to make you whole in every way. Until next week, I'm Lynn Martell for Journey of Hope. Goodbye, good night, and God bless you each one.